Welcome back, communists.
Hello, all of you communists out there, enemies of the state.
And socialists, we'll let you in. Come on.
Yeah, for real.
All you leftists.
Anarchists, anybody.
Anybody.
Comrades.
Yeah, pals. We are going to talk about part 2 of Open Veins of Latin America today.
And part 3. The rest of the book.
And part 3. The rest of the book. Yes, the rest of the story.
People say that I have a soothing voice. I've heard this anyway. Not to brag, but Paul Harvey, if we could only be that gentle and soothing, we'd soon have a communist insurrection on our hands.
But a very soothing one.
Yeah, chill. A super chill transfer of power to the People's Soviets, you know?
Yeah. Just give up your stuff. It's fine.
So where did we leave off with this?
All right. We covered part 1 in the first episode, so go back to listen to that if you haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if I can give some quick Christine summary for the people, kind of recap.
Yeah, do it.
Basically, we're talking about Latin America and how they got really fucked over by conquest and then subsequent resource extraction. Basically trapping them in this cycle where, because they were so far behind, like materially, because their resources were stolen, now they can't develop their own industries, and trade also prevents them from doing that, like trade laws and shit like that.
Yeah.
So basically they got fucked several times. It's the short story.
And I think you brought up an important point that it builds on itself, right? It's self-perpetuating, so that initial destruction, that initial, violent accumulation of capital at the end of a bayonet, by force. That put the imperialist countries in the position of, like you said, being advanced compared to the people they've held back, and so then they're able to continue to do that. It creates that cycle of dependency.
I would say there's also cycles within cycles in this book. You got the boom-bust cycle, which we talked about last time. And then you also have kind of the dictatorship cycle that happens in a lot of these countries where they have a resource and are trying to either nationalize it or develop it, and the U.S. comes in and says, actually, no, we're going to start a war and take that.
Yeah, and they destabilize the political system overall there. Like any sort of trust in institutions out the window. And so that's why you see this kind of cycle of dictators start to happen, because once it's shown to you that, hey, when you don't like what the government's doing, just coup it and do another one. That's what you start doing.
Yup. All right. And now, do you think that's a good recap?
I think so. I think in the first part, it was kind of shown through the different natural resources, these cycles we're talking about, with silver, with gold, diamonds, with then later with agricultural products, sugar, with rubber, coffee, any of these, whether it's through actual direct slave labor or near slave labor, the extractive process draining people to
absolutely
fuel this, that was the same.
Yeah. And it's important to remember both the initial genocide and then, the brutal working conditions that killed even more people, and then the hunger that kills even more people because these countries end up being poor. So all around, very, very bad.
And in contrast to that, you had people's resistance. I think that was something that Galeano was really putting forward a number of times, was that people were resisting against this. Even though they were getting crushed, they were still trying to do something about it. Whether it was just slave revolts domestically, whether it was independence movements in different countries, or like the Mexican Revolution, more of a social revolution there. People were trying to do something about their conditions.
Let's get into part 2.
Okay. So let's start with part 2. Part 2 of, again, Open Veins of Latin America. We haven't said the book title this episode yet.
By the way, that's what we're doing.
Open Veins of Latin America, 5 Centuries of the Pillage of a Continent by Eduardo Galeano. And we're starting part 2, titled Development is a Voyage with More Shipwrecks Than Navigators.
My subtitle for this section was Imperialism, It Still Sucks.
Yeah, accurate.
Yeah. Can I give another fake summary? I guess
Fake summary. Well, I
that's
think
a real
these are
summary.
substantive. Your
Yeah.
summary. A lot of times in my notes, when I get to your summary, I'm just like, yeah, good summary.
I'm done here. All right. For the people, Christine's for the people summary. Chapter 4 here, Tales of Premature Death. Basically, Britain took over. They had all the capital. If you recall, in the first part of this episode, we talked about how they were the ones, like Spain wasn't necessarily benefiting monetarily from the conquest. They owed a bunch of other people. And I think we talked about Britain in terms of like the war with Chile and stuff like that. So
Yes.
Britain
Yeah.
had their fingers in a lot of pies and we're really pulling the strings. Those are two bad metaphors. You should not put your fingers in pies and also pull strings. That's weird.
Yeah, you'll get the pie innards all over the strings.
And you might swallow a string, which is dangerous. Anyway, Britain had the capital, the manufacturing, and the naval power, and they basically made it so none of their colonies could manufacture. So they were forced to buy British products. Mm-hmm. And then only after Britain was established as like the guy, basically, did they allow these countries to engage in quote unquote free trade.
Yeah, very good. So
Thank you.
Britain engages in like this protectionism to start with, and they're just like making sure that their industry develops without competition until,
It's too late.
It comes to a point where it's like, okay, we're done. We're good now. We're advanced now. And we're hungry for more. Our domestic market can give us some profit, but we would like more. And so we need markets someplace else. So they go and they start exporting free trade to all these other places because now it's going to help them.
Can we get into those terms? He uses them a lot in this. So
Yeah.
just give me some basic baby summaries, definitions of protectionism and free trade. What are those things?
All right, well, let's start with free trade. Free trade refers to like removing tariffs or taxes or trade restrictions between countries. Removing or lowering those. Theoretically, right, you make it easier to trade between all these countries. It's good for strong economies that focus on finished goods or processed commodities, right?
okay.
It's good for them because those draw a higher price,
Yeah.
right? It is better for them than it is for economies that rely on exporting raw materials.
Okay.
Because raw materials have a low price. So if you don't put in place any sort of tariffs or taxes or anything like that to change that, those guys are not going to get much money from it.
Oh, that sucks. Because that makes sense. Like it kind of makes sense and it kind of doesn't. Because I was going to say there's more labor put into refining something, but like still like making something is also labor. Like if you're farming, that's still labor. If you're fucking mining, that's really difficult labor.
I guess the pure economist argument would just be, okay, the finished product has to take into account I had to buy this sort of labor-intensive thing first, and then I had to do more labor to it, so it'd be more money, I guess.
Yeah, but as we'll see in this, it seems like they buy these raw materials for a song.
Yes, for sure.
Or they steal it.
Yeah, why buy when you can steal? That can be, revolutionary, but this is not a revolutionary application of that. Protectionism, the other term, is the opposite. So protectionism is protecting a country's industries through tariffs or taxes or trade restrictions between countries. So what you do is you make it more expensive for people in your home state. You make it more expensive for them to buy other countries' products by placing a tax and stuff on them.
Okay. Is that what we did with that China thing like a couple years ago?
Yeah, that's what they were. That's what they were doing, and trying to. Everyone was yelling, "Oh, it's a protection." They don't know what it means, but yeah, that's what it is.
Okay.
It's good for weak economies because it helps them develop a domestic industry. All you're doing is you're preventing people in your country when they go to the store. Stuff from other countries are going to be more expensive, so they'll buy yours. So you're protecting a domestic market.
So that's good when you're building up your like industrial forces.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Britain did this to start out. And the U.S. did this also. It helps you grow. It helps you not get crushed by overseas competition. And if you're doing it right, you use that money and you pour it back into the development of your industry.
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
that it becomes strong. And then you can take the restrictions off once you're inflicting it on other people.
Okay, that makes sense. Quick note on free trade. Longtime listeners will recall that I made a very bad sculpture about this subject in college. It was stupid. It was supposed to be a Connect sculpture, and it was these two dudes. Like I had them on a crank, and they would go back and forth like a seesaw, and they would kiss money back and forth.
Oh, yeah. That's
free trade.
So that's not what free trade is, but...
Damn it. I failed. It was designed to. It was fine. I just had to pass.
So yeah, that's kind of the basic thing. Does that make sense generally?
Yes. It makes sense because I have read this stuff and I know of examples of that already. Like abstractly, that's kind of complicated for me.
Yeah.
But it makes sense in the context of this, which we should get into.
So building off of those two definitions, and like you said, we have ample examples in the book. Galeano uses a quote from Marx to talk about the fight about free trade, saying, quote, "All the destructive phenomena which unlimited competition gives rise to within one country are reproduced in more gigantic proportions on the world market. If the free traders cannot understand how one nation can grow rich at the expense of another, we need not wonder, since these same gentlemen also refuse to understand how within one country one class can enrich itself at the expense of another." What this brings to mind is this is what we're seeing in the book is this globalized example of capitalism's exploitation. Like within one country, when reading the manifesto and when we're reading Engels, he's talking about within one country, right? The capitalists are preying upon the proletariat. And then globally, the imperialist countries are preying on the global south.
For sure. I think we made a lot of those parallels last time too, talking about blaming the poor for being poor. Like that's something that happens both on the domestic scale and the international scale. Like all of these patterns are connected and for a reason. Like it's the same system, just bigger.
Yeah. It's serving the interests of those imperialist countries, and they don't like it when you don't play ball. And we had an example in the book of this society in Padawan that was not playing by the rules established by the orders.
This story was crazy.
All right.
Okay, so there was this guy, Gaspar Rodriguez de Francio, and he basically took over, right? He was very popular, crushed the oligarchy, sounds great. But he also took away political liberties. But I don't know, the book was well, the only people that needed it were rich people. So I don't know.
I mean, he was an old school tyrant. I mean, he was a dictator. It was just him.
That's what I wrote. I was just in my notes, I was benevolent dictator, ... worth it? Because he did some cool shit.
Yeah, he was dictator for life at some point. He was consul. He was ruling with some other people. And then eventually they were just dude, you do it.
But they didn't have hunger, didn't have war, didn't have illiteracy, and started using, Paraguay is it's landlocked. So they started using that as a way to isolate basically and start developing itself instead of being so focused those other neoliberal leaders were doing on outside trade.
Yeah.
So becoming self-sustaining, which is good.
Yeah, no, it was a better path of development, I think, than trying to export everything. Just turning yourself open for the Europeans to plunder you.
Yeah. So he did some cool stuff. Okay, tell me about the bad stuff he did, though.
So he did some negative things.
Okay, here we go. He didn't talk about those.
Yeah, I mean, it's a historical figure. You got to talk shit about them, in some way. You just got to.
No heroes.
One is he abolished higher education. Don't do that anymore.
Okay.
Well, he said because we have limited finances and we need to do these other things. We can't do that. However, he opened the first public library, stocked it with books that were confiscated from his opponents.
Okay.
And books didn't have any taxes or anything on them.
That's cool. So you can't go to school, but you can read at home.
And in his context, school, higher education was an elite sort of thing. So that wasn't he was saying, sorry, poor people, you can't go to college anymore. Because you weren't going to college.
Yeah.
He executed some people.
Okay.
Classic, right? Anytime someone comes up, it's like, but they executed people, which happens, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of a thing.
Some conspirators or whatever who are supposed to be leading some sort of plot against him. He outlaws like political opposition.
Okay, that one's bad.
Has this underground prison called the Chamber of Truth.
Oof. I mean, cool name, but bad concept.
Used some prison labor.
Oh yeah, who doesn't?
He got rid of flogging.
Cool.
But replaced it with a death penalty.
Oh God.
That was quite cruel. The executions were carried out at a stool under an orange tree outside his window, like outside his house is where he would have people executed.
Oh my gosh.
To avoid wasting bullets, most of the victims were bayoneted.
Whoa, that sucks. Okay, some problem areas, room for improvement.
Or give a report card on it, and it's like, it doesn't play well with others.
Yeah, has some control issues.
But besides that, I think the points that you're raising are right, that Paraguay under his rule was pursuing this path that was more self-sufficient and less exploitative.
Yeah, they started nationalizing stuff. 98% of the territory was public property. Peasants worked state-owned lands, and they returned kind of to the land in a way. They went back to just doing like two crops a year instead of destroying their soil.
Yeah. No, that's good environmentally as well.
Yeah. Basically, Britain got mad. They didn't like that they were doing this, right?
I don't know what problem they would have with this. I mean, doesn't seem that bad, right?
So, from what I understand, it sounded like they were freaked out that it was going so well for them because they're like, well, shit, some other Latin American country could be like, we should do that too. And then guess what? We don't have any more stuff to steal.
Right. Yeah. You didn't want this example of self-sufficiency when you're really trying not to have self-sufficiency, trying to have dependency. And so, yeah, Britain gets involved.
They start some shit, basically.
Yeah. They start something called the
War of the Triple Alliance.
Yeah, the War of the Triple Alliance, also called the Padawan War.
Oh, okay.
What would you say a brief kind of outline of how that begins is?
Basically, Britain pays off Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay. I mean, not like it was their banks that paid them off. So they started with Brazil and Argentina invaded Uruguay, and Paraguay was like, man, we had a treaty, like we gotta go in there. And then all three of them teamed up against Paraguay. So, and fun fact, the treaty that combined Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay in this war was written by the banks. So that's a good treaty right there.
Nice, yeah. I mean,
cool.
What could go wrong when you put the banks in charge of foreign policy?
Yeah, a lot apparently, because Paraguay's population was decimated. Less than 1/6 remained after the war.
Yeah, that's crazy. The War of the Triple Alliance, the Padawan War, that was from 1864 to 1870. Like you said, it's devastating.
Yeah.
To all sides. The victors, it says, they were ruined by the cost of the war because they had to borrow so much money to fight it. And so, that just makes them more dependent on Britain. The loser, of course, devastated in terms of population lost, and then pried open. They're pried open to free trade. Now their puppet governments are put in place that are going to do whatever Britain wants now.
Yeah, he kind of introduces this term sub-imperialism, which I thought was really interesting.
Yes.
And I think also has kind of those like macro and micro applications. But anyway, so it's the idea of, a larger or a more capitalist country like Britain basically giving orders to its subjugated countries to go trample on another country and make them even more subjugated. So in this case, it would be like Britain telling Brazil to go fuck with Paraguay. And for a while, like especially, after the war, Brazil was in there like occupying Paraguay on behalf of the British.
Yeah, it turns them into a henchman, kind of, right?
Basically, yeah.
And more or less at some points they were kind of open about that and just saying like, yeah, we pursue their interests. That's what we are, the dominant enforcer of, first British, then American interests in the region. And you're just like, what the fuck are you on about? Why do you like that?
Yeah. I mean, 2 points here. One, it gives me major parallels to like a domestic economic system of like using the middle class to crush the lower class. Like that's something that is encouraged. You are encouraged to try to police how they spend money and to look down on them and all that shit. Like, because the kind of implied threat is it could be you.
Yeah, you have more in common with the masters than with the oppressed. That's a big goal that's a big goal of capitalism's indoctrination. Like, that's what it wants people to think.
Yeah, and racism too.
Yeah, you're on our side. You're on the side of superiors. Help us keep those people down, because that way you maintain whatever you already have.
Yeah.
Instead of striving to have what we have,
Exactly. The other thing that this made me think of, I think we mentioned this last episode too, is just, wasn't it Bolivar or someone who wanted like the whole like South America to be combined or something?
Yeah, that's Simone Bolivar.
Yeah. So like, this is a great example of like when that isn't the case, when there isn't solidarity between these countries, like it is a disaster. Like they're literally being turned against each other, and it is a lose-lose situation. Like we said, like even the countries that quote unquote won the war are now crippled with debt. Yeah.
And when you're talking about 441,000 people killed.
Oh my God.
On all sides, but disproportionately on the Padawan side, 300,000 about were theirs.
It's insane.
Just a massive bloodletting. So for what?
Yeah.
Over a scrap of paper that the banks wrote.
Yeah. For Brazil's budget to be 40% debt payments.
Yeah. Yeah. Even the winners.
Yeah. Congrats, you won being in debt.
Now you get to be somebody's henchman.
Yeah. And I'm not saying this to like shit on Brazil or anything. Like
sure.
They didn't have a fucking choice.
It's not the people of there either, because it's the lieutenants of capital who are there, right? The imperialist stooges who are the government there.
Yeah, the oligarchy.
I think an important point to bring out here with the discussion of sub-imperialism is that this is kind of a transition to economic imperialism. Because you do have like these countries that are nominally independent.
Yes.
But they still nevertheless end up as servants to the imperial countries. The free nations aren't always free, right? They're still dominated by whatever hegemon holds sway.
That's true. I think it's whenever someone hears imperialism, they might think of like, oh, you mean like Britain when they like were in China? And it's like, no, I mean, they're still doing shit. Like, and the U.S. is still doing shit. It's not over just because like there's not a literal American flag there. Yeah. Also, there's a lot of places where the literal American flag is there.
And
like
American troops,
Puerto Rico and Guam and all that shit.
Yeah, no, but you're right. It doesn't require this direct application of force necessarily. And when you're looking at it, you're like, well, okay, why does this happen to some countries and not others? Surely maybe they chose to do that or something. Just dumb choices or something. But again, this traces back to the first part of the book where it's because of that hole that the primitive accumulation of capital put them in.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, hopefully not a lot of people, but I think people do turn to like racist reasoning of like, oh, they weren't smart enough to...
They don't work hard enough.
Yeah. They accept those terms. It's like, I mean, we see again and again, they tried not to accept them and they are killed.
Yeah, and then once you get to this point, the colonized countries, they cannot take any actions against the imperialists because it's not because there are a ton of troops there, it's because they're bound up in terms of relationships of credit. They're creditors now, They have to accept these terms of free trade, of railroads being built through and all that, and giving land away to the builders of the railroads he talks about.
Yeah.
And all of this, he says, it's not set up to connect the different cities in the countries. It's to connect all those cities with the port to export this stuff to other countries.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because I think someone could look on the surface and be like, look, they got railroads. And it's like, those are not for the people. Those are for goods that the people aren't going to use.
Yeah, and an interesting parallel to American history here. The development of railroads in the United States before the Civil War. There were a ton of railroads in the north, and they not only connected cities to like ports and stuff, but cities to cities. There was a big network going on.
That's how you fucking traveled.
Yeah, but if you look at those maps in the South before the Civil War, you see cities kind of barely connected. There's a lot fewer railroads, first of all, but they're barely connected to each other, but they are all connected. The centers of plantations, they're connected to the ports. So they're basically doing the same extractive thing. They're just sending all that to the ports to sell to make money.
Yeah, that makes sense because the North was more of like an internal economy of like industrial stuff, and the South was all like, hey, buy our cotton, Britain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the States, he again kind of draws a parallel, I guess more of a contrast between Latin America and the States, saying the United States saying that because they heavily subsidize manufacturing in like New England and stuff, like there are literally penalties for not keeping a spinning wheel continuously active in the home, which I thought was hilarious. Like someone busts in and be like, are you looming? Are you sewing?
You better be. Get back to it, right?
It's just great.
There was a quote by Ulysses S. Grant there that I found noteworthy. So his quote is, "For centuries, England has relied on protection, has carried it to extremes, has obtained satisfactory results from it. After 2 centuries, England found it convenient to adopt free trade because it thinks that protection can no longer offer it anything. Very well then, gentlemen. My knowledge of our country leads me to believe that within 200 years, when America has gotten out of protection, all that it can offer too, it too will adopt free trade."
That's kind of what happens.
Yeah. Not always the smartest guy, but Grant had that one right.
He got that one.
We definitely did that.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, you're right that like they were protecting their domestic industry. Later, we'll see once they reach that point, they got powerful enough, then they're going to start exporting that all over.
Yeah. And kind of in contrast there, like the South, since it relied on slave labor, was more interested in free trade because it's like, we don't fucking need protectionism because our labor is free.
Yeah, and we don't have a domestic market, really. We're not concerned with that. We're just concerned with building our, opulent plantations and everything and leave everybody else. I mean, they're either slaves or we don't care about them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting that he then turns that lens on the American South, says it's kind of similar there. You don't think about it, but.
For sure. Okay. Chapter 5.
The contemporary structure of plunder. And so I think this gets a little more technical.
This gets very wonky.
I think it's the classic thing in history, right, is that you start out with broad sweeps and you're like, the Sumerians and everything lasts for like hundreds of years. And then as you get closer to modern times, things start happening in smaller windows.
Yeah, it's more granular.
Yeah.
So this is the chapter I was stuck on for like several months. I kept putting it off. I'd pick it up, read a page, and realize I didn't absorb any of it. So let's go.
So yeah, in this chapter, we start talking about how imperialism looks in more modern times. We should say this book was written in 1970, so, 50 years ago, modern times, but still, I think a lot of it holds true.
I think so.
Right out the gate, he has a shout out to my boy Lenin.
He did literally write the book on imperialism.
Yeah. All he was doing there was trying to talk about like how imperialism has changed in form since when Lenin wrote in 1916, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. What are the changes that we see now? We see a change since World War II from Europe being the dominant imperial master to the United States.
Yeah.
And we see a change in focusing on public services and mining, dominating those spheres, to oil and manufacturing being the main imperial
mode of operation. I don't know.
Yeah, what they pursue.
Yeah. I wonder how many people know that, like, I feel, again, if you ask somebody, like, imperialism, how do you think Lenin felt about it? Like, probably a lot of people are like, well, wasn't he like a dictator? He probably was for it. Sorry.
That just means when you're mean is what you think most people think.
I think a lot of people,
is?
would be like, that's when you declare yourself a ruler and you're like an emperor or something.
Yeah, or maybe they have like a foreign policy lens of it, and it's like, that's when you boss other countries around.
Maybe.
That's when you invade places. That's in imperialism.
I don't think people make that connection.
I guess you could also think of it just like the Star Wars Empire. Yeah, you're just bad.
Yeah, you just think of it as it's a dictatorship, right? Like, yeah.
He talks about, there are some changes since then, but overall, the exploitation is different in form, maybe, but not in function. It still is crushing people, using their blood as fuel for the lavish existence of the imperialists.
Same shit, new masters.
There's a quote here that I think people should keep in mind, even now. Today's imperialism radiates technology and progress, which I think they still do, right?
Yeah.
But when imperialism begins exalting its own virtues, we should take a look in our pockets. Yes, we should.
Yes, absolutely.
When capitalism is bragging about what it can do to help you, we got innovation, we got progress, we got, all this stuff, like, see what they're actually doing to you. They're probably ripping you off.
It's a double-edged sword of like, okay, one, I think that's a fallacy to imply that we can only get this progress through capitalism and imperialism. And then two, the fucking human cost to those things, like it doesn't come for free.
Yes, for sure. I think here in this section, he talks about how hard it is to build a domestic industrial base. Even when you're trying to, because like some of the countries we're not trying to, they're just, exporting and I'll get my money and the people will die and that's fine.
Yeah.
But some countries were, but they were still finding it hard, even when they do what's called import substitution industrialization, ISI.
Fuck. Okay.
You still, this is what he starts talking about, where you, instead of importing things, you do protectionist stuff and then try to like make that stuff for yourself, for your people.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. There's a fancy term for it called ISI.
Okay.
Which is just that. When you do that, it still requires you at some point to improve your productive forces, right? To make more shit, to get more technology. And he talks about how that's where you still end up having to go get foreign capital, get loans to buy that or buy it from the imperialist countries. You still, because of that initial gap, you really can't close it even if you start trying, because you end up still in their pocket by having to buy this stuff.
And with like how patent law works too, like you're kind of fucked. Like they're going to charge you out the nose for it.
That's another part of it.
One thing I thought was interesting was there's a quote here talking about like this kind of rapid transformation on like a global scale, that the phenomenon was superimposed on the previously existing socioeconomic structure without entirely modifying it. What I'm assuming he means by that is basically it's that macro micro thing again, like the haciendas and the encomiendas, they exploited people so they could make money and use it on themselves. So one, I think it's the macro micro thing, and I think it's also that they're using those structures to keep that system going, basically. Like if you were a peasant in olden times and you're a peasant in like the 1970s, shit probably didn't change that much for you.
Yeah.
Different people are getting the money now, I guess.
And it may be different in scale, but yeah.
Like it's still not your land. It's still not like your resources. You still don't benefit from this work.
Yeah. And I also think he's referencing the regional differences here. So he's saying that before all these transformations take place, you already have like the wealthy port cities and the poor periphery feeding it. And he's saying that like even once you start introducing all these changes, it just jumps onto that. And so you still see the glittering, the glittering cities, the metropolises of the ports, and the poor areas piled on outside of that, the slums and everything.
So it all just exacerbates existing structures, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Bummer.
Oh, yeah. Continues to be a bummer.
All right.
And part of that, I guess, part of that process is when he talks about the Latin American bourgeoisie existing as this deformed or stunted, these agents and functionaries, he says, of foreign corporations. Like they're not a real independent bourgeoisie that's like trying to pursue its own national class interests there.
Yeah.
They're not trying to develop a domestic industry or anything like that. They're, again, just henchmen.
Yeah, I think we grew up with the idea, I mean, like having been, Mexico is a part of our lives in a lot of ways, that like every politician in Mexico is just totally corrupt. Like that's what we grew up with.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to hear that. And I think Americans maybe hear this and think, well, that's bad. Like, how shitty. Like, they must be morally bad people. But I think it's also like they're kind of fucking pigeonholed into that. Like, as we see in this book, like, I think they also can be corrupt and bad people. But like, as we see, when you do try to develop your own industry, it gets taken down real fast.
It's hard, I think, in America, in the United States, for politicians to like cut against the grain of the forces now of interest groups and corruption and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even
Capitalism.
AOC is the darling of the left or whatever. Well, some people at least. Some people don't like her still, but she has to spend so much time and money fundraising. Like, that is literally part of the job, and there's nothing she can do to get around that. There's only so much you can do inside the system,
and the systems are just so much worse in a country where you're on the other end of the imperialist relationship.
for sure.
So it's even less likely that you're going to get somebody who comes out and, takes this populist stance and is like, we're going to use, the power of the people to rise above this. Like, that's even harder to do. So you could say, yeah, people should be doing that. I agree. But it's
unlikely.
Yeah. And so it's not like they're just shitty for not doing it. It's way harder for them to.
So he talks about the difference between dynamic and traditional resources or industries, which I thought was interesting because I had never heard these terms. But he says that traditional industry is like your consumer goods. So like t-shirts, cigarettes, whatever people buy. I go to the store and I buy a thing.
Okay.
And then he talks about dynamic goods he calls them intermediate and capital goods. So things like ore or like oil and, I would assume mostly stuff from the ground. Stuff you have to make into other things.
Okay, so things that require more processing, kind of?
Yeah. So he just talks about how that dynamic stuff is completely in foreign control and it's kind of strangling their entire economy.
Yeah. I think the reason he's saying this is because of its relationship to trade, it seems like. That traditional goods don't rely so much on, they don't have to rely on trade. You can make like t-shirts, cigarettes, whatever, to sell to other places, but there's something that could be consumed by a domestic market.
Anyone can make that, but like if you're the only place in the world that has like this huge tin deposit, like you're not going to use all that tin, and people really want that tin. You could use all that tin.
You could use all that tin if you had a tin refiner, but you don't. That's one of the things there is it requires that, why he calls them, capital goods or something, is because you do have to do some more refining to it. And that requires trade because if you're in these countries, you don't have those capabilities.
They didn't allow you to build factories.
I think it's interesting. He's painting these as kind of a good way to make sense of different factions of capital having different preferences, right? The traditional industries are like better. They're like more okay with like reforms and stuff. Whereas the dynamic industries that are dependent on this trade relationship, they are more tied to this international capital. So they are like more opposed.
That makes sense. I mean, you don't hear about a small business owner of a, of rare earth minerals mine,
right?
Or something.
Yeah, mom and pop.
That's not a
oil
thing.
Refinery. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at. Okay, like why do we have different political parties in a country that's run by the bourgeoisie? It's because they do kind of have a little bit of differences in preferences that can be explained by these different forms of industry.
And I think it's disingenuous because I think oftentimes when people are like, yeah, I'm pro-business because I'm trying to protect small businesses. And it's like, again, there ain't a small business of petroleum.
Yeah.
Like, you're actually protecting them and they make way more money. So, like, the percentage-wise, that doesn't fucking make sense.
And there are different policies that could narrowly target, help small businesses. But
yeah,
usually when you sign on to be pro-business, that's not what you're talking about. I have a note on page 216. He talks about Brazil signing a deal where they agreed that they would be responsible for all these foreign companies for the debts that they rack up.
What the fuck?
And it makes me just think, I'm thinking, morons, why would you do that? But of course, it's to attract capital, right? To make a positive business environment and all this. It's every time right wingers will continue to do this. They always do this.
For sure.
And they're like, oh, we want our state to be a good environment for business.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we know all about that here in Texas.
We're in fucking Texas. We are basically just legs wide open for businesses.
and that doesn't necessarily mean that every law that you put in place that's good for businesses is good for people. You know,
Yeah.
We don't have any sort of labor laws that allow people to organize here, right to work. Those are not synonymous, I guess. And anybody listening to this knows business is oftentimes there to fuck you over.
Yeah. Let's talk foreign aid.
Foreign aid.
Okay.
Sounds good.
See, it sounds good, but I'm going to read you this quote that I fucking loved.
All right.
He writes, aid works like the philanthropist who put a wooden leg on his piglet because he was eating it bit by bit.
True.
Yeah.
It's not cleaning up the mess that you are making. It's like, busting a window and putting a little Band-Aid on it sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't have it highlighted here in my notes, but I can make a people summary here.
All right.
So from what I understand from reading this is that basically all our aid, all our loans to these countries. Well, one, it's not aid because aid sounds like we're giving it to them. Like, here you go. That's what that is.
Right. Yeah. Just helping out.
Yeah. Like a gift, a donation. But these are actually loans and they come with big fucking strings attached. And most of them seem like, okay, you now have to only buy things from like the US and they're going to be way more expensive. And you can't sell or manufacture your own thing. So like, fuck you.
Yes.
That would be my people's summary.
That's a good people summary. That just about wraps it up. But foreign aid, you can look at it as kind of an arm of capital. Because who is it under the administration of? The bourgeois state, right?
Yup.
It's not like a big conspiracy. It's not like they're like, here we are. We're going to rule the world through our foreign aid. But it ends up happening that way.
I think growing up in my little liberal world, I would get very annoyed when people, usually libertarians or just conservatives would do this too. Just like, you can't trust politicians. They're all bad and blah, blah, blah. Because they would often use that as an excuse to say like, fuck like social programs because they're going to run it badly.
Yeah.
I don't know. Becoming a leftist, it's like on the one hand, it's like, yeah, we should do more like social programs, but also, yeah, all politicians are corrupt, and it's not because they're like mustachy people, like you said. It is because the system is bad. And
yeah, they have bad class interests.
Yeah, but like I bet, like if you talk to those people further and be like, okay, so do you want money out of politics? Like then they're like, well, it's free speech. Like, which one do you want? It's fine. Whatever. It's not fine, but. Anyway, what's this IMF thing? Seems bad.
Okay, yeah. So when we get to foreign aid, we have a whole bunch of different agencies involved.
Lots of acronyms here.
Let's get into it. So the IMF is the International Monetary Fund. It's an international financial institution which claims that it, quote, fosters global monetary cooperation, secures financial stability, facilitates international trade, promotes high employment and sustainable economic growth, and reduces poverty around the world.
I mean, that sounds good, but it's a bank.
Yeah, actually, of course, it serves the interests of the imperialist countries.
Yeah.
So the origins of the IMF, it was set up alongside the World Bank at something called the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944.
Okay.
A big deal in terms of like the international economic scene. This is 1944, so it's near the end of World War II, but the war's still going on. So the 44 Allied nations hammered out the post-World War II international monetary and financial order called the Bretton Woods system.
What's the system?
So this is a system that lasted from then till like 1971 when the U.S. left a gold standard. And all of it is like set up to have the international monetary system like backed by gold and based on U.S. dollars.
Okay.
It faced criticism from the start because like the U.S. controlled 2/3 of the world's gold supply, and it was, set up to be backed on that / the U.S. dollar. So it's really American-centric in that way. The Soviets criticized it, for example, and didn't join once it was, once it was put together, because they said it was like, this is just a branch of Wall Street, basically.
Yeah, I was going to ask why the dollar, why gold seems pretty arbitrary.
Yeah, well, they called the shots at that point. They had
Cool.
taken credit for saving Europe. So the IMF, that's where it's set up, along with the
Okay.
World Bank. And what does it do? So for one thing, it watches the economies of the member nations, like it monitors them. Nearly every nation is part of this. And reports its economic data to the IMF. They kind of like patrol it and make sure that no country is doing anything too crazy in terms of its impact on international markets.
Okay, questions.
Yeah.
One, okay, what is crazy? Like,
There's a wide variety, because if you think like China is a member, so China's here and whatever they're doing is considered okay.
Okay.
The United States is in this and whatever we're doing is considered okay. So like there's a very wide range, but one thing they're doing is we don't have any loans or anything from the IMF. So it doesn't, they're not like too concerned with what we do, because we don't owe them any money. But if you owe them money, they're way more concerned with what you're doing. We'll get into that.
bad. Okay.
The IMF is primarily focused on maintaining the international monetary and financial order, just making sure that everything kind of stays the same and works
Okay,
for the
good luck.
capitalists.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to ask next is if I had a database full of all of the world's economies, wouldn't you fucking use that to like make your friends rich?
Well, all member countries have access to all that information. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's like a sharing thing. The IMF draws money from its member countries in a quota system. So basically, it's a tax. The richer countries pay lots more than the poorer countries. But the bad side is that this also determines your vote share. So richer countries control the vote.
That's insane.
The U.S. has 16% of the vote in the IMF.
Jesus.
Japan and China are the next closest with around 6%.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're worth more than Japan and China put together in the IMF's eyes?
Yes.
Cool.
And so the IMF, it also will loan out money using the money that it's got from its quotas. It'll loan money out when countries get into trouble. So it's more of a crisis situation thing.
Okay.
If countries face like a financial crisis or whatever, or they're about to default on their entire national debt or something, IMF will step in and be like, here's a loan. Nice guys, right? Not really. They're more like loan sharks.
Okay.
Because they require borrowing nations to make a lot of what we call structural reforms, which is now we tell you how to govern your country pretty much. This fits into something called the Washington Consensus, which is a bullshit, terrible thing.
What is that?
The Washington Consensus is everything we don't like. It's deregulation, liberalization of trade, privatization of nationalized things, austerity.
I don't like any of those things. Those are my least favorite things.
Yeah, it's crap. A lot of times, I mean, if you're thinking of a country in crisis, these are really not good things you want to be
No,
inflicting
you don't want
on them.
austerity. That's a bad one.
Yeah, and these loans, they wreak havoc in that way, and they almost always increase inequality.
What the fuck, man?
They want you to be responsible. They want to inflict the right amount of pain on you so you'll never do this again. And they want to make sure they get their money back one way or the other.
How are they going to get their money? Well, I guess I don't understand like how they're going to get their money back if these loans seem like they're set up to make this country fail.
They make things worse, and the country kind of does fail from the point of view of like life is worse.
Oh, but like the capitalists in that country do okay?
But yeah, if you still do have surviving businesses and a surviving government that like can still squish people enough to make this payment, then you're good.
That's insane.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. They're loan sharks, dude.
Yeah.
They're just milking these places.
That's pretty bad. I don't like that. Okay. Cool quote from the creator of the IMF policy in Brazil, who says some bad stuff. Obviously, the world is unequal. Some are born intelligent, some stupid.
Aww.
To postulate that national enterprises must have the same access to foreign credit as foreign enterprises is simply to ignore the basic realities of economics.
Just economics, bro. That's just how it is.
Nothing personal. I just think everyone from your country is stupid. That's why you're poor.
He's just a financial bro.
God.
That's just
That
like the
sucks.
market, man. You can't do anything about that.
Fuck this guy.
That's a big, this is, I guess, a big component of economic imperialism, right? It's another way to get in there and tell them what to do, to get in there and tell them to get to work harder to make more money for you because now you've loaned them money and they have to pay back.
Yeah, from what I understand reading this, the IMF and these various organizations, it seems like they are specifically set up, often like literally with these companies' help, to benefit these companies, like in terms of resource extraction and stuff like that. Is that correct?
Yeah. Another organization involved in all that is the World Bank. It has a few differences, like it doesn't do quotas. It does this kind of crazy money shell game thing where it borrows money from governments and banks and individuals by selling them bonds, which are just IOUs. It's just, we'll pay you back this later. They use that money to issue loans that are focused on development in poor countries, building roads, schools, whatever. It faces similar criticisms to the IMF.
Yeah, seems like we have a quarter of the votes.
In the World Bank, yeah. Voting is still controlled by the rich countries because it's allocated by how many shares of the bank you own. So the United States controls the World Bank as well. It's development loans and stuff. It's not based on emergencies, but still it's based on developing countries and stuff. They still have a lot of conditions, and it's still, those conditions are like geared toward austerity or privatization of things that obviously leads to negative impacts, but good impacts for capitalists. Yeah.
Yeah, because this motherfucker, the chairman of the World Bank, Eugene R. Black, quote, "Foreign aid stimulates the development of new overseas markets for U.S. companies and orients national economies toward a free enterprise system." Okay.
Yeah.
In which the U.S. can prosper. Because you can say, oh, we're helping them develop. It's like, no, you're helping yourself, bud.
Yes. Yeah. And their argument, of course, would be, well, why not both? Why not both is because if you look at the economic data, it doesn't help them. So that's why not both.
Yeah. Oh, and we have a quarter of the votes I mentioned earlier. All of Latin America, which is made up of 22 countries, has less than 1/10.
Man. Yeah.
Cool.
No say there.
Cool voting system.
Some other organizations set up in this. They have the Organization of American States, the OAS.
Yeah. Didn't we talk about this one in the Che Guevara episode?
Yeah, we mentioned these guys. They were created in 1948 as an anti-communist alliance.
Cool.
That was, it's not like the only thing they were there to do, but like that was a big part of it. They, to contrast with these other groups, have equal voting.
Okay.
Every member country gets to vote, but it's still dominated by the United States because the United States contributes more money to it than everyone else. So we could just take our money and go home if they don't do what we like, really.
Oh, okay. So it's just mild threatening.
Yeah, pretty much.
Chill.
Broadly speaking, the OAS is focused on liberal priorities, democracy, peace, human rights, free trade, development, kind of an anti-drug program thing too. But the main thing it's focused on, of course, is development for capitalism's sake, right? Like, steer this in the right direction sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that set up the Inter-American Development Bank, which he also talks about.
Oh, I thought that was a separate thing. Okay.
It's, I guess it's a separate thing, but it was literally created by the OAS.
Okay, cool. These guys suck too.
Yeah. They were set up in 1959. They're kind of like a World Bank because they raise funds by selling the bonds and stuff. Mm-hmm. Those are backed by fees that the member countries pay. Mm-hmm. And also by these promises that member countries put forth. They like pledge like, oh yeah, if you need it, we'll pay you this much. But they don't actually have to pay that money unless it's needed.
Yeah.
Which usually it's not. So you can like write into the budget like, oh, we'll pay you
this
$30
much.
billion, but you don't have to.
That's crazy.
So they kind of move a lot of fake money around that way. And anyway, they give grants and loans, but they, again, have a lot of conditions on it. He talks about in the book how they have the condition of, you have to use this money to buy U.S. goods and things like that.
It's insane. It's just like, it's like showing up to a fire and saying, here, I'll put out your fire for me, but you got to buy this water from me first.
Yeah. first and forever.
And also anytime there's another fire.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. Another cool voting system here. The U.S. is the only member country with veto power. So, neat.
Yeah, because votes are determined by capital. So, yeah, that's how it goes. All of those, I guess the criticism that he's leveling in the book is that these groups, it's economic imperialism. These guys are governing these countries effectively in some way or influencing them in the direction that the U.S. wants to go.
So not only are they controlling these countries through loans and quote-unquote aid, they're also controlling other countries through it too. They give an example in the book that in the OAS, the U.S. needed another vote for something. And so they went to Haiti and gave them an airport on the condition that they vote with them to kick out Cuba from the OAS.
Yeah, man. Can't have those commies in there.
So
crazy.
It's not just wheeling and dealing on like a capitalist level. It's also on like a global, really fucked up level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad.
I like this assessment of the free market or free trade here. He offers in page 237 and 38. It says the so-called free play of supply and demand in the so-called international market does not exist. The reality is a dictatorship of one group over the other, always for the benefit of the developed capitalist countries.
For sure. Like these are the same people that are whining and crying about free trade. And it's like, this shit is not free.
Yeah.
Freedom for some people.
It reminds me of when leftists talk about, the dictatorship of the proletariat. People say, oh, you don't want dictatorship. It's like, dude, you have dictatorship right now. It's the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, you just can't see it.
Yeah, it's called democracy and everything, but that's what it actually ends up being.
It's got a coat of paint on it.
Yeah, it's called free trade or whatever, but that's what it actually ends up being, is this dictatorship.
For sure. Can I read you more quotes from assholes?
I would love it.
Welcome to Christine's Asshole Quote Corner. First up, we've got David Rockefeller in 1963 saying, "The U.S. will arrange its economic aid program in countries showing the greatest inclination to favor the investment climate and will withdraw aid from other countries not showing a satisfactory performance."
Damn. So dance for us and please us or else.
Basically, yes. Holding these fucking countries hostage and then not even helping them. Like, to use the fire analogy that we had earlier, that's like making you pay for the water. Oops, it's actually gasoline. It's a bigger fire now.
Sorry.
I fucked up. All right. Next in our asshole quote corner, we've got Senator Jacob Javits. Quote, "Latin America provides an excellent opportunity for the United States to show, by inviting Europe to enter, that it does not seek a dominant or exclusive position." So just using other countries for bargaining chips. Chill, very chill.
That's so nice, though.
Look how nice we are.
We don't want to be in charge. We're friendly. We'll let other people play too.
Do you want to share this exploitation? I've got some extra.
How many of them are chairing multinational corporations that have operations in both?
Mm-hmm. Can we talk competition?
Sure. Let's talk competition.
From this section, what I understood, he talks about a few specific examples, as he does, as he's wont to do. He loves an example. But it seems like the general pattern here is that, one, things are cheaper in these Latin American countries because they're so poor that it's that whole unemployed masses thing. Like, that's why their wages are low.
Yeah.
So they produce these goods for very cheaply, and they aren't basically allowed to sell it for more, or other countries will fucking throw a fit and like start shit with them.
Yeah, pretty much.
They'll put crazy tariffs on stuff to keep it ridiculous. Like, here's an example of Argentinian and Uruguayan meat. Like, that's some of the best fucking meat in the world. Like, we all know that. Mm-hmm. But we put all these crazy tariffs and regulations on it in order to protect our, like, ranchers here.
Again, when you're talking about free trade, it's free for some and not for others,
Yeah, because what does that mean? That means you think the labor of, probably maybe white rancher in the United States is worth more than an Argentinian rancher. You think that labor is worth more. That's what it means.
Yes, yeah. This sets up this kind of vicious cycle where even when you're trying to build your domestic market or whatever, you have to end up importing stuff, which means your exports are so cheap, right? That's this whole thing, is your exports are always going to be cheap to other places. And whatever you're trying to bring in to improve your production, you can't afford it with the meager amounts that you're getting for everything that you produce. So you end up having to take out those loans with all the strings attached. You pay more in interest. You're dominated more by the U.S. and you're back to worse than when you started.
And those agreements that you made, guess what? They're locking you into this cycle even further.
Yeah.
It's bad. So he also outlines what he calls the coffee wars, which I thought this was a really interesting example. So the U.S. and Europe, would buy coffee beans from Brazil and Africa, and they take those beans and they take it home and they concentrate it in U.S. and European factories to sell as a soluble coffee, like ground coffee, roasted, all that stuff.
Folgers.
Yeah. And then Brazil started trying to make their own soluble coffee, and they were accused of unfair competition.
How dare you?
5 factories out of the 110 factories worldwide that do this. They wanted 5 fucking factories.
Well, that was unfair competition, man.
Clearly.
What was it? What would be the argument for that? Just you're doing it and you're not us? Was it that bald-faced, or was it like...
I can't think of any other logic that would apply here.
I mean, I know that that's literally why they're doing it, but I wondered if they had a justification like, oh, you have a dictatorship or something that we installed.
I don't know. I'm trying to think from a pure ass, I'm putting on my asshole economist hat. Is it, it's unfair because we have to travel with it, so it's more expensive? And it's then fucking sell your own shit. It's our coffee. You'd be fucked without it.
Yeah. It's not really it doesn't seem to be like a free market argument as to why it would be bad.
I don't know.
That's funny.
They ended up having to place a tax on it so it wouldn't outcompete the U.S. markets. So
the U.S. made them tax themselves?
Yeah, an internal tax. That's so bad. Oh, we got one more organization, LAFTA.
LAFTA, the Latin American Free Trade Area.
I mean, hey, the U.S. isn't in this one, so maybe it's not as bad. Oh no, this was the funny one, actually. It is bad. Spoiler alert, still bad. The first LAFTA agreement was signed in 1962 by Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay. And the book says, but really it was an agreement between IBM, and IBM. Oh. All it did was eliminate import duties so they could build more factories there.
Wow.
So,
just wrote the whole thing for themselves, basically.
Basically, yeah.
Classic. And I think one of the arguments he's making in this whole section is that this ends up looking nicer maybe, but being way more efficient, way better for the capitalists. We look at it as maybe soft imperialism or not as violent imperialism, but it's also good for them too. It's cheaper. I think one of the subsections says technocrats are better hold-up artists than Marines. Yeah. They got a better PR, too. Because, again, you can slap on the name of development and, use all those feel-good words like aid, and then it seems like you're the good guy. When it's no, you're not. You are making the situation way worse. Yeah. Another thing he talks about in here is modern technology in Latin America being kind of another tool of domination, kind of like the old railroads is just capital intensive technology stuff now.
Yeah.
He talks about the new factories and stuff that were being built there being actually kind of outdated or secondhand.
I was confused as to why that was the case.
Well, I think it would just be you're offloading your surplus factory capital equipment.
Oh, and that way they couldn't take it over and do their own thing too.
Right. Well, you got to imagine, right? Your factories or whatever, they get their equipment from somewhere, and that place probably ends up at some point having a little bit of surplus that nobody's buying anymore because you got newer shit. So they can just sell that to the colonized countries, And that's why I said, I went to this factory. It was completely out of date. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I was confused by that.
And it's just another way to rip them off. Like they have to buy that equipment from you instead of producing it themselves, producing newer and better versions of that. Instead, they're going to buy your old outdated stuff.
That sucks, man.
And he talks about universities as, this is supposed to be, right, a tool for progress. But actually, it's being used to export the best and the brightest of these countries to then go serve the oppressors.
Like, even the things it's supposed to be doing, it does a bad job at.
It perverts or it corrupts the countries into when they're pursuing their own things that, you're right, should be good for them, end up coming around and biting them instead.
Okay, yeah, we're going to come help you. We're going to give you this aid. But the aid is actually a factory. Oh, and also the factory sucks. Like,
yes, yeah.
Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It's diesel fuel, not just gasoline.
Yeah.
I have a cool quote for the cool quote corner.
Okay.
Simon Bolivar apparently said, "We shall never be happy, never." And I feel that, man.
Yeah, and he's talking about that from the point of view of just, right, what has happened to the region. And by this point in the book, we're thinking the same thing. Like, there's no fucking way out, right?
Yeah, it's just a horrible cycle, as we've said.
Because you're thinking, like, what could we do? Like, this, at this point, I think he does kind of do a good job of then tying it together and saying, actually, it seems maybe naive, but I think that there is some sort of a way out. He does kind of propose a little bit of what he thinks could happen. He starts with, an autonomous cultural policy, when it is genuine, requires and promotes deep changes in all existing structures. Which to me reads kind of like a cultural kind of nationalism of some sort, like a Latin American oriented sense of culture, sense of determining their own path.
That's interesting. I think that's interesting because having grown up as a Latinx person, like, we definitely make fun of other, like, Latinx people.
Yeah.
There's, like, colorism. There's, like, you make fun of other, like, Spanish speakers' accents and countries. Like, you're like, oh, that's not mine. Like, it is this weird, disconnected region.
And I think that's what your quote on Simón Bolívar is about, too, is this notion of, like you said, his grand dreams of uniting everything in a Pan-American union gets crushed, gets picked apart. Every country's out for itself. And Galeano discusses this, saying, that imperialism kind of deforms Latin America by preventing what he calls these territorially united people, preventing them from uniting, even though they share the same continent, like the United States unites all the way across its section of the globe. These guys can't, because they had fragmented those economies for their own benefit. The imperialist masters had divided up and say, we're going to extract this from you, we're going to extract this from you, but you guys are separate things. This is where he was talking about, like, the structure of, like, the railroads and the transportation and everything.
I thought that was super interesting. He was saying that, like, basically to travel to some of these places, you'd have to fucking, like, sail around the entire continent because, like, there's no railroads that connect these countries that are right fucking next door to each other. Yeah,
and that's part of that. That's part of that intentional division that was serving a particular purpose, not the people living there, but the foreign capitalists.
Because you think about it, if we've talked about these revolts that happen, like if these revolts had access to other countries who were on their side, if that War of Three Nations or whatever had been the other way around, of like War of Four Nations against Britain, like that'd be a different fucking story. Yeah. I mean, Che Guevara wanted that too, wanted the whole like Pan-American thing, right? I mean, I can see why.
This is the dream, right? And he finally finishes this section, which is the original end of the book. Page 261, he says, "The task lies in the hands of the dispossessed, the humiliated, the accursed. The Latin American cause is, above all, a social cause. The rebirth of Latin America must start with the overthrow of its masters, country by country. We are entering times of rebellion and change. There are those who believe that destiny rests on the knees of the gods, but the truth is that it confronts the conscience of man with a burning challenge."
I mean, earlier you're saying, like, how do they get out of this? And I was like, they can't unless they fucking get rid of the United States. Parody, whatever, but don't come get me.
He's basically painting that picture and presenting it almost hopelessly, and then saying, I think this is probably the only chance we have is banding together. I don't know. Maybe this is the big thing I keep drawing from it. This is one of the reasons I really love Howard Zinn's People's History, is that it keeps presenting that image of people resisting throughout, and I think that one of the ways that bears fruit in this book is here at the end when he says, hey, just like all these examples I've shown you of people resisting, yeah, they got crushed. Maybe we won't. Let's try,
Yeah, because I've only read parts of Howard Zinn's People's History, but from what I remember hearing about all these fucking slave rebellions I had no idea happened, and there's reasons people don't want you to know about these things.
Yeah.
They don't want you getting fucking ideas, and it's literally Bacon's Rebellion is a sentence in most U.S. history books. People are mad about some taxes, whatever, move on. That's it.
Yep.
And we don't show that this whole time there has been a struggle, and it's much more. I find that most of mainstream history is much more philosophical based, we talked about in
idealist, right?
Yeah, in scientific utopian. You know what I mean?
Socialism, utopian, and scientific.
Yes, the one that I read. Yeah, the idea of just being idealism and all these abstract concepts enlightenment, we were into this at this point. And then we got into this.
And then some great man had a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all super broad and just baby shit.
Well, this is a great example of that, but in the Latin American context. This is this is a materialist look at why Latin America is the way it is.
Yeah, and we don't even fucking cover Latin America in education. I knew none of this.
Yeah, I mean it's de jure covered in world history, but a lot of history classes don't always get to where they need to go.
Yeah, it's just not I keep coming back to. I mean, I think if we did imagine if we did study Latin American history, how the fuck would they sell it so it doesn't sound because if you actually look at what happened, it's very bad. There's a reason, I guess, why it's left out. Yeah, it's probably why they don't. Don't look there. Just don't look under the equator. Everything's fine.
Or it's glossed over as unrest, instability, chaos. It was there. We don't know how it happened. But there was a lot of instability there. Don't
worry, guys. We went in, gave them democracy. It's all good now.
Yeah.
Also, we got richer. Don't worry about that part.
I don't know how that happened either.
It was an accident.
History is baffling in an idealist, if you're looking at an idealist.
If you take out materialism, it is literally, it's just a mishmash. Yeah.
So many people hate history or find it confusing or whatever is because it doesn't make sense if you're just and then this guy thought of something. It doesn't work.
It doesn't make sense. Or even I remember being really frustrated in world history or art history, how chapters jump around between place to place. I'm okay, what the fuck were the other countries doing while we're talking about this one?
Yeah, they don't go back and cover the same time period but somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just really reductionist.
Yep.
All right.
Part 3.
7 years after.
All right, so part 3 written 7 years after the initial publication of the book. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts here?
Oh, man. Well, first off, he says, banned by military dictatorships, which is always a good thing in my book.
Yeah.
That's something I like to look for in a book.
You can tell a lot about, the saying is you can tell a lot about somebody by the enemies they make. So there you go. Although, he wrote earlier, not all military dictatorships, right? He had
that one guy.
The left-wing one, a couple of them.
Yeah, there were a few of them. It was interesting. I particularly like this one quote. I suspect that boredom can thus often serve to sanctify the established order. So he's basically talking about how most history is written really dry. Most economics is written really dry.
Economics.
And
oh my God.
I can't even.
Those guys need to, it should be required for graduating with you have to get advanced writing degrees, also
you have to take improv classes or something to be entertaining.
Yes, and just creative writing.
You have to present your thesis as a stand-up special in order to get your degree.
Can you imagine what would Ben Bernanke's freaking stand-up title, his Netflix stand-up special be called? You know?
I don't know, but I would not watch it.
Burning it all down.
Burning it all down. Oh, do you think he's mad that Bernie took that slogan? You know, he's like, oh, I wanted to
Feel
be
the
the burn.
It's in my last name.
No, but I think this is so true, and I think it is reflected in like why we do have a lot of liberals that aren't overly concerned with economic things, or if they are, it's not enough because it's boring and it's wonky and it's like, oh my god, I don't know. And then that is so much of why I am excited about doing this show, is because like I'm learning things, and once you know, poke your way into that and you realize, oh, this is the reason for everything, like
Yeah, and I think that it kind of serves as a veneer, right? Or it kind of gets you in the mindset of when you tuned out listening to somebody who knew a lot about something drone on, right? It sounds like they know what they're talking about. I mean, they're talking about it a lot. They're using big words.
Exactly.
They're very boring. You know, they're like some sort of school assembly speaker. And you're just like, oh my gosh, it's like whatever you say, I'm sure it's right.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know, it lends authority to it maybe that people are not as willing to question.
And I think it's a self-feeding cycle, because in order to get into economics, you probably got to be rich. So you're gonna like, you know, push forward economics that serve you and your interests.
You know, and it's not just that, because I mean, yeah, you can get into scholarship, whatever, but economics is so tied up with like business.
Yeah.
In terms of universities and everything, there's a lot of cross contamination, but cross like referencing between the business school part and like the economics school part. And
for sure, like that is how your success is measured. It's like, oh, you're a chairman of this bank, and oh, you did this company or whatever. And it's like, okay, you made out all right, but did everyone make out all right? And the answer is no.
Yeah. Economics, boring, and boring on purpose so that it can convince you that it's just too boring to pay attention to, and please just let us do our thing and make money.
I think when we look at like centrists, you know, like Democrats and stuff like that, there's this tendency to be very wonky. And I think that also kind of lends like a veneer, like you said, to their policies. It's like, oh, you're talking about some complicated tax credit. I don't understand it. No, you're probably smart. You probably know what's best.
Yeah, it's probably fine. Yeah, that's...
Like everyone, you know, was very swayed by Elizabeth Warren because she has a plan for everything. Like, never mind, you can't understand any of the plans, and they're actually, you know, wouldn't be that helpful to a lot of people because there's so many fucking hoops to jump through, but she's got a plan.
And the hoops convince people that it would work strangely, like perversely, because like if you just go out there and say, I think we should give money to people, then people are like, unrealistic, you know. Or if you say, I think everybody should have health care, people be like, how could you pay for that?
Yeah, so instead you have to tack on all these weird tax credits and fucking just random stuff.
And we've been taught to expect that from serious policy, because the people who would benefit from the quote unquote serious policy want us to think that that's required. You know, they don't want us to think like, oh, we could actually just like nationalize shit. We could actually just like provide for ourselves. Like, especially us, dude, like other countries that are dependent on, like he's talking about in this sort of cycle, like if they try that, they're going to, you know, it's very likely that they could get crushed by us. So
we're the crushers.
Yeah. Who's going to come in and stop us? Yeah. You know? Besides like the military and the national security state.
Yeah.
Which is also very possible.
Yeah, that's true. And it will be internally crushed.
Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah, I think he gets into, after talking about that and talking about how, you know, the book was initially received and how he was trying to cut through the boredom, kind of open people's eyes that way, radicalize people. He talks about the state response. More broadly speaking, it says how to stifle the rebellious explosion of the great condemned majority, how to head off those explosions, how to avoid those majorities becoming even larger if the system doesn't function for them. Leaving aside charity, the police remain.
Yep.
And he starts talking about the crackdowns. He starts talking about the secret police, of all these dictatorships, a Pinochet, of all these guys. It reminds me, this crackdown and everything that he's talking about reminds me of like Tsarist Russia, this means of terror as a means of controlling people. He finishes then by saying, that labor unions, that strikes, that rebellions are stirring in Latin America at the time that he's writing that. And he's saying, this isn't primitive capitalism growing, but this is old, deformed capitalism dying.
Okay.
I thought that was interesting because he's kind of laying out our argument that like we're not moving like from feudalism to capitalism then to socialism. He's saying we're already in this just kind of fucked up version of capitalism that doesn't work the way it's supposed to at all. And so we're just going to kill that and move then, of course, then to socialism.
Yeah, I mean, leftists on the internet have seen a lot of these memes of just, it's not really a meme, it's more just like a holding my face in terror of late stage capitalism. Like there's lots of Twitter accounts that do that share just like these horrifying stories of just like, the GoFundMes for healthcare and just there's countless examples of just like, this is not how that should work. I saw one the other day that was someone tweeted at YouTube saying, hey, I had to watch an ad before how to give CPR or something to my grandma. Like, can you not? And they're like, we're sorry. You can get our premium subscription for blah, blah, blah. And it's like, are you kidding me?
If you can afford it, yeah, sure. We can help you save your relatives.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I don't know. I want to say that it feels different, but I'm not old enough to know if it feels different. So,
yeah, I don't know.
Old people, does it feel different? Tell us.
Yeah, for sure. That would be a good listener response. There's also a subreddit, I think, that's called Late Stage Capitalism.
Probably.
That contributed to me becoming more radical.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where Galeano closes the book, discussing that, the next possibility is if people do rise up, if people do overthrow the neoliberal order, then they have a chance. They could institute something under the people's control, a worker state, a post-capitalist something. It's been a while since he wrote that, though. We have very limited examples of any similar things happening. I mean, you do have some leftist governments there, but you don't have like a large-scale, region-wide overthrow of capitalism.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Come on, guys.
Listeners, get to it.
Can we
if
please?
You're in that region. Please don't go William Walkering your way down there.
Please don't. No. No, remember, we got to take out us first.
True. Yeah.
Shit, it's our turn.
Parody.
Yeah. Final thoughts.
The scale is 1 to 10, but you can't use 7.
Okay. I am going to rate this. I'm going to rate it a 9, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this should be fucking required reading in high schools. It completely opened my eyes to the horrors. I knew about like the conquest and stuff, but like it's never covered in enough detail. It's always something that we just kind of sweep under the rug for the most part. Even having grown up in that culture, like we said in the first episode, it's still part of that culture. So we don't want to talk about it too much because it's pretty fucked up. So yeah, it completely opened my eyes to that. And then, furthermore, how strangled these regions really are. The only reason it's not a 10 for me is that one chapter took me fucking months to get through. Literally months sitting on my bedside table. I read like 3 other books while I forgot to finish reading this. So.
Yeah.
That's the IMF section, a little bit dry. But other than that, listeners, go read this fucking book. It's very good.
Yeah. I'm going to rate it a 9 as well. I don't have the dry portion really. Like that was...
You were fine with it.
It was pretty interesting to me. Like I said, the big thing I liked of that was kind of peeling back the veil and being like, oh, damn, this is why these guys do this. Like, But for me, there were some sequence issues that confused me. I was just like, oh, what is, we're talking about this now? Okay. And it just kind of like jumped back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, like time periods wise.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I kind of didn't care about that. I was just like, cool story.
I was like, wait, we're talking about a different global economy. But it was fine. It worked out. That just was initially hard for me to grasp. Other than that, so it's very emotional.
It's very emotional.
It's like it's poetic. it's written to incite, to stir your passions.
For sure. Like I refer to myself frequently as a bag of emotions. And I had days where I couldn't read this book. I'm like, I'm too upset to read about genocide right now. Like, I just can't do it. You know, I'm like working on a book about Mexico, and like I felt very, it feels like this book somehow deepened my connection to Mexico in ways that I like appreciate more now. And like, I don't know how to explain it. It is a very emotional read.
Yeah. One thing that I initially thought was kind of a weakness was that it's not really heavy on theory. It doesn't really take too much time to ground like why these things work out the way they do. It's just kind of like, hey, here's some shit that's happening.
And then this happened.
Yeah. But I think that that's also kind of a strength, and it's accessible. I would be reading this, and especially early on, I would just be like, Abby, do you know that I would just read a passage. I would just be like, this is something about coffee growers. Really hit her because now she'll only buy fair trade coffee. I'm just like, if this could be a door, a kind of foot in the door for people who are not of our political persuasion, that could be very handy.
I think so. I mean, I did the same thing with my spouse. I very much was just leaning over like, hey, let me read you this horrible fact. And it's just, I mean, again, I think I said this last episode too, but for every example we gave here, there are several more. Like, it is chocked full of these stories, and it really shows a pattern. And then I liked that. Like, I liked how many examples he gave, because it kind of, to me, it encouraged me to think of further examples too. Like, I made a lot of connections about like, oh, this is why, you know, like our clothes are so cheap because of the same thing. Like, and I think that is kind of the benefit too of not putting it in like abstract theory terms, you know?
Yeah. It's another way, I guess, because theory is a way to do that too, but this is another way to provide a lens for people to see the world. I think the most powerful things that we've read here are, well, we've had the benefit of all of them being this way, but we've experienced this when we've read theory before, and when we're reading this, I think that one of the big benefits we get from it is coming away with a lens of seeing the world. You know,
Definitely.
Of applying it and saying like, damn, that's why this thing happens. That's why these groups are trying to do this thing. Like, it makes the world make more sense to us.
Yeah, I think one of the big things I took from it was he, you know, painstakingly lays out all of the horrors of the conquest and also the racism that was justifying it. And it's very easy to draw that line to racism justifying this today. Like, it's obvious. Yeah.
And without an understanding, you can see why people would jump to those sorts of racist conclusions. If you don't know why any of this is happening, you might be like, well, that's just how people there are, you know, they, you know, or like idealist explanations, like, oh, they don't have strong traditions of democracy or whatever, or constitutions. Or
I wonder why.
Yeah, like if you don't understand what's actually happening, then you end up with these stupid explanations.
Yeah. Another mind-blowing moment for me was the whole military-industrial complex thing. Like, the whole crazy cycle of like, all right, we need to prop up this military that's funded by private corporations. I know. We'll get things for super cheap. Oh, how do we get things for super cheap? We use the military to get things for super cheap. It's just this Ouroboros.
That's what it is, man. It's a death machine.
Yeah.
We found the perpetual motion machine, and it is death.
Yeah. And bonus points if the country you're invading tried socialism for a second.
Yeah, that's two birds with one stone there.
Yeah, you get
cheap
the resource.
Materials, dead socialists. That's like Empire's favorite thing.
That's true. Well, that was a bummer note. Don't forget the death machine.
Yeah, but we could rise up and overthrow it, and should.
That's the hope anyway. Anyway, please read this book.
Yeah, Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. It's great. You should read it.
Oh, there's a Hugo Chavez quote on the cover.
Yeah, he famously gave this book to Barack Obama.
I don't think he paid attention. I don't think he read it, man.
Barack Obama derived 0 lessons from this book.
If he read it, he just like laughed the whole time, or he was...
Or got ideas from it.
I should invade that country.
Libya's looking pretty good over there with its resources.
And then I'll offer them some aid. It'll be great.
We'll get the World Bank in on this. They'll help out.
I forgot how good your Obama impression is. We haven't had cause to hear it in a long time. So he's making a comeback, I guess.
I am nearing completion of his autobiography, Volume 1 or whatever it is.
My Christmas gift to you.
I got to tell you, I started that while doing research on Lenin for our Lenin episode. And you talk about the fucking whiplash of listening to this guy talk about how, I came in with ideals and I realized that, I'm going to have to change if I'm going to play politics in Chicago.
What is to be done?
And I'm also reading about this guy who's like constantly getting his revolutionary groups raided by the police. And I'm just like, wow.
That's insane. Yeah. All right. Next week, I think we're going to kind of, pardon my pun, we're going to continue in a similar vein.
Oh. Yeah, your pun is pardoned, I guess.
If listeners can hear, there is actually the garbage truck outside. I'll just go ahead and take myself out and put myself inside of that.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to continue in a similar vein. And just like you I know how we're big fans of imperialism here.
Yeah, my fave.
Mm-hmm. Imperialism's pretty much my least favorite thing. I know that one of your least favorite things is charity. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get into charity.
Good. This is fun. I have family members who work in charity, so it's fun when I talk about this and whenever I've had a few glasses of wine.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the implications there. What are the pros and cons, but kind of what should socialists, what should leftists, what should our view, what should we think of charity? So yeah, we can look forward to that.
In the meantime, you can find us online. We are on Twitter @teachcommunism, Instagram @teachmecommunism. If you want to send us an email, that is teachmecommunism@gmail.com. That's where you can suggest future episode topics. Those are great. We especially love the random ones. I have someone talking about something in Finland. I've never heard of that. So send us your weird stuff.
For sure. Yeah.
I'm going to rephrase that. Don't send us that much weird stuff. You know what I mean? More
weird
obscure.
Yeah,
obscure leftist material. Anyway, you can also just compliment us or whatever. If you want to compliment us in a more public fashion, which I like, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, rate and review. Super helpful way for people to find the show. Even if you're not an Apple user, you can still leave a review. So don't let that hold you back. Mm-hmm. We are on YouTube. Just search for us there. That's how you want to listen to your podcast. And we have a Patreon, patreon.com/teachmecommunism. For $5 a month, you get access to our notes for this episode. Both of us wrote notes, so you get double the notes for $5.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty beefy. I wrote a lot of quotes and shit because I was very angry.
And stuff that we didn't even get to in the episode, really. So
yeah, we skipped around a bit.
Scrap thoughts.
Bonus. The proceeds from Patreon will go to a mutual aid organization at the end of the year. This past year, we were able to donate $116 to Feed the People Dallas, which is a great Black and Latinx-led mutual aid fund.
Hell yeah. Solidarity, not charity.
Hell yeah. We're going to talk why next week. That's it, right?
Yeah, that's it. Great discussion as always.
Thanks.
And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in to this episode. You can catch us next week on another episode of Teach Me Communism, where the class struggle is always in session.
Stay angry about genocide.
Remember, imperialism, it sucks.
For sure.